How is everybody? Let me know if you can hear me. How do I sound? Is the audio good? Is the visual good? Liv says all good. I gotta sound great. I gotta sounds good. Fantastic. This is such a better platform for this, right? Sometimes the stars just align. Uh, the way that I'm thinking about doing this so that we can continue every Monday is just, I'll just read naturally and then I run into insights throughout the week in the book. And then um, by the time I finish really kind of chewing on and trying to digest these insights, it's the next Monday. And then we have as many as we have. And you'll kind of get a demonstration of what I mean by that today. So we'll go through a quick recap of some of what we went through last week, and I think there's about 9 insights from today's reading, and then we'll kind of go through the practices which are necessary or which are important to avoid the Orwellian future here. Guys, I have to wait. Just hang on a second. Wait a second. Wait a minute. I have to show you this. I just have to. And I want to post this. You guys have no doubt seen this, right? I don't know if I can zoom in there. The fan art? The fan art is so legit right now. I really love this. Guys, all of the fan art and the drawings and the AI. I think there was one from Animal Farm where I am like the Napoleon, right? With it's just so dope. I'm like floored by that, and the time that it takes to do it, I genuinely appreciate it. But for the recap, before we jump in, Winston started the last chapter by saying, "Hope, if there is hope, it lies with the proles." And so it's good that Winston still clings on to hope at this moment, even though it all kind of seems hopeless for those who have been here for all of the reading so far. We're about a little bit more than a quarter of the way through the book. The party members have had so much stripped away from them and are in this constantly cognitively limited state of having to perform the 12 minutes of hate and these elaborate demonstrations and exercises, even being forced to control their facial expressions and words in front of constant surveillance. The proles, on the other hand, we learned, have a lot more freedom. So they go to work, they watch TV, they have relationships, they can have sex, they drink beer. The problem with them is that they're deeply unconscious, right? Winston kind of concludes with this tragic paradox of saying the revolution won't happen unless the proles wake up. And the proles won't wake up until there's revolution. So there's this kind of closed system, this paradox that can't be broken through. And so we might say that the only thing that, will wake them up is if life got so bad for them that they have like a rock bottom experience. But that doesn't seem forthcoming. Like, remember, there are party members and thought police that walk around the proles' neighborhoods looking out for people who seem to have woken up. So almost like agents walking around the Matrix. You remember the Matrix? Like the agents would walk around in the Matrix just making sure that, nobody seems close to waking up or waking anybody else up. All business as usual, right? So we ended last Monday's reading with 3 former party members who nobody had seen in a while. These were some of the original revolutionaries like Jones, Aronson, Rutherford. They had been arrested, disappeared for a long time, and then they reemerged battered and bruised after months of torture to confess their crimes against the party. And they're now like left as these zombie-like shells of their former selves drinking at the Chestnut Tree Cafe. And I think where we actually ended was that creepy nursery rhyme. I'm going to go back to it. Under the spreading chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me. There lie they and here lie we, under the spreading chestnut tree. Right? And we talked about how chestnut wood looks strong, but it's actually brittle. This is, we called it like a creepy nursery rhyme for people who don't have souls or spines anymore. And we ended up talking about how you can tell a corrupt movement because it will start to eat its own leaders. Sometimes the founding insight of a particular group is just gone because leaders always change. And so it's important to ask yourself if the leaders that are in power now, with whatever system you're a part of, are the leaders still dedicated to the founding insight? Or is it just a continuation of the project, right? And we talked about that a little bit. So, continuing. And we're just going to continue from right under the chestnut tree rhyme there. The three men never stirred. But when Winston glanced at Rutherford's ruinous face, he saw that his eyes were full of tears. And for the first time he noticed, with a kind of inward shudder, and yet not knowing at what he shuddered, that both Aronson and Rutherford had broken noses. A little later, all three were rearrested. It appeared that they had engaged in fresh conspiracies from the very moment of their release. At their second trial, they confessed to all their old crimes over again, with a whole string of new ones. They were executed, and their fate was recorded in the party histories, a warning to posterity. About 5 years after this, in 1973, Winston was unrolling a wad of documents, which had just flopped out of the pneumatic tube onto his desk, when he came on a fragment of paper, which had evidently been slipped in among the others, and then forgotten. Those of you who were with us when we read the book Animal Farm will remember the Battle of Cowshed, where Snowball fought bravely with the animals against Jones and his men. I think Snowball actually took a bullet for the revolution. Remember, a couple of them got shot in the Battle of Cowshed. It was difficult after that for Napoleon and the others to convince the group that Snowball was an enemy. Remember, even Boxer, who was known for that slogan, "Napoleon is always right," even he began questioning the authorities, telling him Snowball was a traitor. Guys, I think that the reason that it was so important to publicly shame these pioneers of the revolution is because there's still some memory of their bravery left amongst the people, right? The party leaders want to make sure that there isn't some secret loyalty to these guys, right? These are the guys who, if you really think about it, you can get the founding insight. I for some reason I keep saying the founding insight. Like, I want to drill that phrase into my mind, because whatever group that I'm a part of, I want to ask, what's the insight that started this thing, and are we still dedicated and committed to that? So the party leaders want to make sure that there isn't some secret loyalty to these guys. So they torture them into a false confession, then rearrest them and kill them. So why does that matter? Why do I bring that up? Remember what we said last time about remembering the founding insights? As party leaders change, which they will, as church leadership changes, which it will if you're a part of a church, as managers and leadership within your job changes, which it inevitably will, always remember the insight that inspired you to show up in the first place. And ask yourself if the new leadership or the presiding leadership matches that founding insight, or matches the thing that inspired you in the first place. Sorry, guys, I'm always looking over to the side because, you guys remember Snowball was always kind of kicking us out of the chat on YouTube. This one seems to be running smoothly. So, but I still am traumatized from the YouTube days. So I look over to the chat to make sure that my volume hasn't stopped and my, picture hasn't frozen or anything. Phantom, keep me up to date. Okay, we're good. The point was that at both trials, all three men had confessed that on that date they had been on Eurasian soil. They had flown from a secret airfield in Canada to a rendezvous somewhere in Siberia, and had conferred with members of the Eurasian General Staff, to whom they had betrayed important military secrets. The date had stuck in Winston's memory because it chanced to be Midsummer Day. But the whole story must be on record in countless other places as well. There was only one possible conclusion. The confessions were lies. Of course, this was not in itself a discovery. Even at that time, Winston had not imagined that the people who were wiped out in the purges had actually committed the crimes that they were accused of. But this was concrete evidence. It was a fragment of the abolished past, like a fossil bone which turns up in the wrong stratum and destroys a geological theory. It was enough to blow the party to atoms if in some way it could have been published to the world and its significance made known. Guys, this is a very deep sentence. It was enough to blow the party to atoms if in some way it could have been published to the world and its significance made known. So the reason this line is so creepy to me is because Winston has a double challenge if he wants to blow up the party with this evidence. Step one would be to get the evidence into the hands of the general public, and that's hard enough. But step two is to convince the public of the significance of the evidence itself. Guys, think about the society that we currently live in, right? Is it just about getting the evidence in the hands of the people? Or do a lot of people just consider evidence to be insignificant if it doesn't align with the party? Isn't it interesting? That's an interesting insight. What's scary is it kind of seems that our current problem isn't that evidence isn't widely available, but that the significance of the evidence isn't understood, right? So in order to not play party favorites, I'll convict both parties of this because they both deserve to be convicted of this. There's evidence widely available that Trump won the election, right? But he's still believed to be a dictator. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is called a communist by the right, even though there's plenty of evidence that she's not. She's a democratic socialist who believes in a capitalist society with like stronger social safety nets, which is fine. You may not like that, but both sides have the evidence to disprove the other person's viewpoint. But they lack the wisdom to grasp the significance of the evidence. That's a separate problem. So Winston is saying there's a problem here with actually getting this evidence into the right hands. But even if I got the evidence into the right hands, would they even understand or care about the significance of it? I wish that there was like a Jar Jar Binks in this story, like a comic relief. It gets darker and darker. Kim says, especially as the public have memories that have been cultivated through controlled media. Absolutely. For sure. Mephisto says repetition bias, recency bias, nostalgia bias all fall into what makes and evidence. But the separate problem is that understanding it. Right. That is an inner battle I have all the time. Yeah, for sure. Matilda says Hitler was democratically elected. Doesn't mean he wasn't a dictator. Yeah, when Hitler got in there, he definitely made sure that there was no way to get him out. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. It was enough to blow the party to atoms, if in some way it could have been published to the world and its significance made known. He had gone straight on working. As soon as he saw what the photograph was and what it meant, he had covered it up with another sheet of paper. Luckily, when he unrolled it, it had been upside down from the point of view of the telescreen. He took his scribbling pad on his knee and pushed back his chair so as to get as far away from the telescreen as possible. To keep your face expressionless was not difficult, and even your breathing could be controlled with an effort. But you could not control the beating of your heart. Sorry, guys, when I hold my book up like that, I get blurry. To keep your face expressionless was not difficult, and even your breathing could be controlled with an effort. But you could not control the beating of your heart, and the telescreen was quite delicate enough to pick it up. He let what he judged to be 10 minutes go by. Tormented all the while by the fear that some accident, a sudden drought blowing across his desk, for instance, would betray him. Guys, have you ever been in a situation where elements you couldn't control seemed to be working against you? Winston's trying to control his breathing. He's trying to control his heartbeat. And all the while, he's worried that the wind itself might blow something across his desk and expose him. The party control has been so successful that his own body has become his enemy. And the question is, in what way do we try to control or manipulate away our natural aversion to things which seem wrong for the sake of the cultural moment? You kind of get what I'm saying there? I'm saying like sometimes when we're in certain groups, because we're in a very, very politicized culture right now, sometimes when we're in certain groups, we'll just grit our teeth and bear it, even though we don't agree with it, in order to be a part of the cultural moment, right? We'll pretend like up is down, black is white, right? Instead of be the only one in the room who, is authentic sometimes. So in every age, our bodies tell the truth before our mouths do. We get like a tightened chest, our stomach turns, our pulse quickens. Those sometimes are signals that something around us is false, coercive, or unjust. But in a culture that kind of demands constant performance, we learn to hide those signals even from ourselves. Just like Winston, slows his breathing to survive under the telescreens. We regulate away our natural aversion to what feels wrong sometimes. Not because we believe the lie, but because reacting honestly could cost us social belonging, career, or safety, or reputation, right? You see how all of this, it really applies to today, right? If anyone is a modern prophet, it's Orwell. Then, without uncovering it again, he dropped the photograph into the memory hole, along with some other waste papers. Within another minute, perhaps, it would have crumbled into ashes. That was 10, 11 years ago. Today, probably, he would have kept that photograph. It was curious that the fact of having it in his fingers seemed to him to make a difference even now, when the photograph itself, as well as the event it recorded, was only memory. Was the party's hold upon the past less strong, he wondered, because a piece of evidence which existed no longer had once existed? But today, supposing that it could be somehow resurrected from its ashes, the photograph might not even be evidence. Already at the time when he made the discovery, Oceania was no longer at war with Eurasia. And it must have been to the agents of Eurasia that the 3 dead men had betrayed their country. Since then, there had been other changes, 2, 3, he could not remember how many. Very likely the confessions had been rewritten and rewritten until the original facts and dates no longer had the smallest significance. The past not only changed, but changed continuously. What most afflicted him with the sense of nightmare was that he had never clearly understood why the huge imposture was undertaken. The immediate advantages of falsifying the past were obvious, but the ultimate motive was mysterious. He took up his pen again and wrote, "The immediate advantages of falsifying the past were obvious, but the ultimate motive was mysterious." So the immediate advantage would be power, right? Like by rewriting history, the party always appears to be right? People lose the ability to compare the present with the past, so they can't prove that things have ever been different. But the ultimate motive, the motive that even Winston can't fully name, is to destroy the concept of objectivity itself, to destroy even the concept of objective reality. So the reason there seems to be so much turmoil in the country as of late is because there are what appear to be two versions of reality which are generated by both parties in real time. Like nobody is actually being objective, or at least very few. They're just kind of digesting the news which comes out of their own brand of the Ministry of Truth, right? That's really scary stuff. He wrote, "I understand how. I do not understand why." That girl Nico says, "It makes me think of any abusive relationship, having to hide certain emotions and expressions to not give away what you're really thinking, or else. What a profound insight, for sure." That's crazy how, an abusive relationship is just, it's kind of like another microcosm of the pattern that we're reading about right here. Bay says, or they don't want shame for you bringing it to light. Yeah, it's so important to find yourself in the right circles. And that's essentially what the practices are going to be about when we get there, is like, how do I know that I'm in a circle that actually values truth? An authentic circle. You guys remember Dream Life? We'll get there. I just love that Ren and Skinner was like, I don't want no one around me that ain't based. I got the meaning of based wrong. But now that I understand it, I understand how, I do not understand why. This is what Winston writes. He wondered, as he had many times wondered before, whether he himself was a lunatic. Perhaps a lunatic was simply a minority of one. At one time it had been a sign of madness to believe that the earth goes round the sun. Today, to believe that the past is unalterable. He might be alone in holding that belief, and if alone, then a lunatic. But the thought of being a lunatic didn't greatly trouble him. The horror was that he might also be wrong. He picked up the children's history book and looked at the portrait of Big Brother, which formed its frontpiece. The hypnotic eyes gazed into his own. It was as though some huge force were pressing down upon you, something that penetrated inside your skull, battering against your brain, frightening you out of your beliefs, persuading you almost to deny the evidence of your senses. In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. And what was terrifying was not that they would kill you for thinking otherwise, but that they might be right. For after all, how do we know that 2 and 2 make 4? Or that the force of gravity works? Or that the past is unchangeable? If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controllable, what then? Yeah, that's probably the darkest sentence in chapter 4. right? If the mind is controllable, which is, it's very near completely controllable. It's very fragile and manipulatable. Then how do we know that it's and I think the lesson here is just to protect it. Be very protective of this thing. Don't play these kinds of games. The party's victory isn't when you buy into the lie, or even when you begin to lie for the party. That's when they're winning, right? We're already there, right? It's when you start really thinking it's true, when you lose your whole entire spine and need truth kind of spoon-fed to you while ignoring your intuition entirely. That's when the party is won. When nothing matters except for what one side says, and your entire life is politicized. Your entire life. There's nothing that you do just for the enjoyment of it. It has to be because of your dedication and commitment to Big Brother, as they say, or whoever your allegiances are to. But no, it continues, his courage seemed suddenly to stiffen of its own accord. The face of O'Brien, not called up by any obvious association, had floated into his mind. He knew with more certainty than before that O'Brien was on his side. He was writing the diary for O'Brien, to O'Brien. It was like an interminable letter, which no one would ever read, but which was addressed to a particular person and took its color from that fact. The party told you to project the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease with which any party intellectual would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer. And yet he was in the right. They were wrong, and he was right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid world exists. Its laws don't change. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall towards the earth's center. With the feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien, and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows." We talked about that phrase as being kind of the axiom of the entire book, right? That phrase basically sums up the entire project here. But continuing, from somewhere at the bottom of a passage, the smell of roasting coffee. This part gave me goosebumps when I first read it, because this is what I'm about to read. This first sentence in the next chapter, it is the comic relief. It's not funny, but it's so powerful how much this small phrase lightens the load. Hear this. From somewhere at the bottom of a passage, the smell of roasting coffee, real coffee, not victory coffee, came floating out into the street. Winston paused involuntarily. For perhaps 2 seconds, he was back in the half-forgotten world of his childhood. Then a door banged, seeming to cut off the smell as abruptly as though it had been a sound. Just as Winston's nose knows the difference between real coffee and the synthetic, cheap victory coffee, people know when someone is genuine, right? I was just talking to, Phantom before I came in here, and we were talking about how, people can smell a lack of authenticity. Especially as things become less and less authentic online, it's going to be very, very difficult to hide anything, right? Because, authenticity keeps us safe. The reason you look in someone's eyes when you talk to them is because you want to know what they're thinking. What are they looking at? If I look up like this, you're going to look up like, well, what am I supposed to avoid, right? We have built-in authenticity detection systems, right? And it's such a beautiful thing how this real coffee, the smell of real coffee, stops him in his tracks, right? You don't have to worry about what it's going to take for you to avoid this future. Your job is to be authentic and allow the natural magnetism from that authenticity to attract people to you, and it will. It'll attract the right people. If you're inauthentic, if you're playing the game, if you're playing the social game, if you're playing the I hate half of America game, whatever half of America you hate, and your commitment to that, echo chamber, I suppose, right? When you really sit with yourself, when you sit in silence, when you meditate, when you become a real authentic person who isn't afraid to offend, but isn't trying to offend either, right? It's a balance. Wisdom is a balance. Man, that natural authenticity will draw people, and it will draw people who want to be authentic and who want to help you be more authentic. The coffee thing just meant a lot to me. All I needed was a shot of coffee. And it was like Orwell is like, it's so dark. Chapter to chapter to chapter. It's like we're getting darker and darker and darker. And then Orwell's like, okay, here's some real coffee. Just take a sip of it, and then I'm going to slam the door and continue the mania. So, excuse me, I'm going to read that again. From somewhere at the bottom of a passage, the smell of roasting coffee, real coffee, not victory coffee, came floating out into the street. Winston paused involuntarily. Right? The authentic itself will cause someone who's in an inauthentic universe to involuntarily pause. We are impinged upon by authenticity. It calls to us, right? So there's a degree to which your job here is very simple. I don't want to repeat myself, but that's huge. That's really, really important. He had walked several kilometers over pavements, and his varicose ulcer was throbbing. This was the second time in 3 weeks that he had missed an evening at the community center, a rash act, since you could be certain that the number of your attendees at the center was carefully checked. In principle, a party member had no spare time and was never alone except in bed. It was assumed that when he was not working, eating, or sleeping, he would be taking part in some kind of communal recreations. To do anything that suggested a taste for solitude, even to go for a walk by yourself, was always slightly dangerous. There was a word for it in Newspeak. Own life, it was called, meaning individualism and eccentricity. See? Like everything in Winston's life is supposed to be politicized. If you're a party member, you politicize everything, right? There is no behavior which isn't a, political gesture. I remember Alan Watts saying that in Hinduism, even brushing your teeth is a religious act. There's nothing in Hindu life, at least according to Watts, everything, if you're a Hindu, is a religious act. You brush your teeth religiously. You cook your breakfast religiously. Everything is an act, a religious act. Well, in Winston's universe, everything is a political act, right? So the concept of own life as a Newspeak word is a reminder that we should be careful when everything becomes politicized. That's not a circle you should necessarily be in. Like, why isn't your entire life consumed with fear and the commitment to the eradication of your enemies? It becomes odd to people that you spend time contemplating the stars. I've brought up Joe Rogan to people and have seriously had them look at me funny. Like my decision to watch a self-proclaimed idiot comedian tells them something about me politically and where my allegiances are. I have friends who have lists. Long lists of places that they've boycotted because they found some moral imperfection with the CEO or a racist tweet from 5 years ago and will inconvenience their own lives for the sake of avoiding these places that they have, and look, to a degree, if you want to kind of insulate your life against the offensiveness of the world, it's your right to do that, right? But, you know, these to me hit like, it's a very, very interesting kind of warning he's kind of putting out there with this concept of own life. It was called meaning individualism and eccentricity. But this evening, as he came out of the ministry, the balminess of the April air had tempted him. The sky was a warmer blue than he had seen in that year. And suddenly the long, noisy evening at the center, the boring, exhausting games, the lectures, the creaking camaraderie oiled by gin, had seemed intolerable. Once you've tasted the truth, the lie becomes more and more heavy until you can't carry it anymore. And I really do believe that this will be our saving grace in times like these. One of the reasons I think that we need like 8 hours of sleep on average per night is because our minds are always presenting these convenient illusions 24/7, right? And it's exhausting to keep it up. Not only the illusions of secondary properties like colors, shapes, textures, temperatures, but all of the meanings that we assign to all those things and the fluctuations of those meanings, right? The relationships and the changes in the meanings of those relationships as we gain friends, lose friends, are betrayed by friends. It's difficult to keep that up. But another thing, one of the things that made continuing to be fake more exhausting might have been the smell of that authentic coffee. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you are at peace in the midst of a scary situation, the peace becomes infectious, right? It might annoy some people. It might seem as if you're ignoring your responsibility to be as scared senseless as everyone else is. But it might just be the example people can learn to follow in order to change. Phantom says, that's why inauthenticity is so intolerable and why we become so hypersensitive to it. Inauthenticity is a scary thing because I think everyone in a mob is inauthentic, right? Like when you have this mob mindset where you just have this giant group of people, none of which have any idea what monster has been created by this mob, right? Is there authenticity there, or is... Mrs. Biscuit says masks slip down heavy when you taste the freedom of authenticity. Absolutely. I love you, Mrs. Biscuit. That's my wife, by the way. The cognitive dissonance, mental gymnastics are impossible to maintain. For sure. I love that, Mephisto. I completely agree. The cognitive dissonance, mental gymnastics. Hold on, I have to scroll down. People are sending my wife love hearts. The cognitive dissonance, mental gymnastics are impossible to maintain. Yeah, I'm telling you, man, it's the free energy principle. I always bring it up. Carl Friston, the most cited neuroscientist in all of history, probably the greatest neuroscientist in all of history, still alive. He created the free energy principle, which is like the bedrock of cognitive science. And the free energy principle is that your mind is always looking for shortcuts. Your brain is always looking for shortcuts in order to conserve free energy. And when you're constantly stressed and constantly in fear, man, are you exhausted, right? Drop it if you can, if you can. Bay said, I was about to be mad. Someone was in here claiming her title. Oh, that's awesome. Phantom was asking about that too. He's like, is Mrs. Biscuit, is that legit? Do we need to snipe her? I love it. No, Mrs. Biscuit is really my wife. I love you guys. She's full of insights too. You can DM her. She has words of wisdom for days. So own life. It was called Meaning Individualism and Eccentricity. And here's where we were. The sky was a warmer blue than he had seen in that year. And suddenly the long, noisy evening at the center, the boring, exhausting games, the lectures, the creaking camaraderie oiled by gin, had seemed intolerable. On impulse, he had turned away from the bus stop and wandered off into the labyrinth of London, first south, then east, then north again, losing himself along unknown streets and hardly bothering in which direction he was going. If there is hope, he had written in the diary, it lies in the proles. The words kept coming back to him. Statement of mystical truth and a palpable absurdity. He was somewhere in the vague brown-colored slums. To the north and east of what had once been St. Pancras Station. He was walking up to a cobbled street of a little 2-story house with battered doorways which gave straight on the pavement and which were somehow curiously suggestive of rat holes. There were puddles of filthy water here and there among the cobbles, in and out of the dark doorways, and down narrow alleyways that branched off on either side. People swarmed in astonishing numbers, girls in full bloom, with crudely lipstick mouths, and youths who chased the girls, and swollen, waddling women who showed you what the girls would be like in 10 years' time, and old bent creatures shuffling on splayed feet, and ragged barefoot children who played in the puddles, and then scattered at angry yells from their mothers. Perhaps a quarter of the windows in the street were broken and boarded up. Most of the people paid no attention to Winston. A few eyed him with a sort of guarded curiosity. He just kind of talked to us about the scene that he just described. This dirty scene in the narrow alleyways with this, gross water and, disheveled people and children playing in the dirty water. What's kind of crazy is that when the natural spontaneity of human interactions becomes overly politicized, even the once grotesque becomes a sense of pleasure and nostalgia, right? It's like there are certain people that have bills to pay and who just enjoy the simple pleasures of pizza and beer and watching the football game. And when you are around people who just politicize everything, you get this sweet sense of nostalgia, even in these kind of thrown together, busy, grotesque scenes, because at least it's real, right? It's like the scene Winston is describing is dirty and busy, but at least it's alive. So Orwell here is describing an ecosystem of human vitality without meaning, right? I think Socrates would have called this the unexamined life, right? The life of the proles here. So when Winston says there's hope, it's because there's some kind of authentic life here, right? There's minimal surveillance. There's romantic relationships are allowed, but it's also without any direction, which gives Winston kind of that feeling of despair. So it's like vitality without awareness is just noise. And that's the proles, unfortunately. But awareness without vitality is paralysis. And that's the party that he's a part of. Let me ask you this. Let me know in the chat. Which one would you choose? Which one would you choose if you were trapped between those two poles? Would you join the party and have all the dystopian information about what's actually happening behind the scenes, but also have your voice silenced by threat of death? Or would you rather be like the proles, blissfully ignorant of what's happening behind the curtain and therefore living a simple and ultimately meaningless life? If you had to choose, if you were invited to become a member of the party and you were one of the proles, it's almost like a red pill, blue pill situation. It's very Matrix-like. Phantom says, awareness without vitality is suffering. 100%. And man, I almost feel like that's how, when we really, really dunk our head in political waters, it's like suffering no matter what, right? It's like because you feel yourself. I remember I did a reaction to Californication, and they said something like a pregnant at 16 with a teenage dream, getting high on information, right? It's like a lot of us are high on information. It's like when you're just like, you've politicized everything, you're super political, and all this information just causes a lot of suffering. Matilda says, happy in the slums, but not if it means forced ignorance. A lot of people are just not answering this question, which I don't blame you. I don't blame you for not answering this. Live a meaningless, unexamined life of just repetitive, bare minimum nonsense, or, be driven insane by the lies you have to perpetually generate for the system. Mephisto says, choose smart. You might be the crab that makes it out of the bucket, or will you be pulled back down? Yeah. Facts plus tax. Rock or a hard place, you choose. Liv says, I would like a third choice, please. Facts plus tax. I think we'll leave it at that insight. We'll continue next Monday. Socrates, there's a famous story about Socrates where he went to the natural scientists, the natural philosophers. Sorry, we would call them scientists today, but back then they were called the natural philosophers. And they had a lot of facts, but there was no relevance behind the facts. They were just, like the philosopher Thales said, like, all is the moist, meaning he thought that everything was fundamentally made out of water. He said the lead stone is suke, which is where we get the word psyche. And he meant that magnets have souls. And it's a good thought, for a primitive mind to say, okay, you know what? This rock moves this rock. And it's like, so there's cognition in these rocks, right? He had ideas. But Socrates would ask the natural philosopher, how now shall we live, right? It's important not just to have the facts, but to have those facts be relevant, because there's a ton of facts. I mean, if you guys looked on my desk right now, I kind of have a messy desk right now. There's a lot of facts here, but we have to ignore the majority of the facts to get about the business of living our lives. So Socrates said, I don't just want the facts from the natural philosopher, I want the relevance. And then he sought out the, after the natural philosopher, these were the political philosophers. They were called, it's escaping me right now. If anybody has it, it's used as a derogatory term today. But he goes to these other philosophers, and it's on the tip of my tongue. It'll come right to me after this is done. And these were philosophers who would write speeches for politicians. And in their writing of these speeches, they were all about relevance, but they didn't care about facts. They didn't care about truth, right? And so they had kind of the opposite problem as the natural philosopher. And so Socrates wanted both. He didn't just want the facts, he wanted relevant facts. But he figured out that, the natural philosophers had facts with no relevance, and the other side had relevance with no facts. You'd write a political speech for this politician, then you'd walk right across the street and write the political speech for his opponent. You wouldn't care about what the facts are or what the truth is or what the relevance is. Sophists came to me. It's like, sophists. And where we get the term sophistry, right? People who say a bunch of relevant words or platitudes without having any truth connected to it. We were gonna make merch that said, enough is enough, biscuit for president. You remember that platitude that doesn't really mean anything? Well, what do you plan to do for climate change? Enough is enough. Well, what do you plan to do about the wars in the Middle East? Enough is enough, right? It sounds important, but it's empty, right? Those were the sophists, right? Marketing, yeah. So I wanted to give some insights about the circles that we want to find ourselves around, right? So number one, you want to find a circle where honesty is safe, not weaponized, right? So in an authentic group, and these insights are just going to be about how do we find authentic groups like to be in, so that we're not entering echo chambers or places where you're not allowed to speak, right? Ask yourself, just in your mind, about the groups that you're involved in. Can I disagree with this group without being exiled from it? Just take a second and just think in your mind. You're in certain groups, whether it's a church group, whether this is employees that you hang out with after work. We have groups. Maybe it's your family. The question is, can I disagree with this group without being exiled from it? Can you say, I'm hurt, or I see that differently, and the room doesn't tighten? That's how you know you're among the real ones. Honesty strengthens connection rather than threatening it. Bay says, this is why I stay inside. Yeah. Fandom says, if you can disagree without being exiled, then it's a good group. That's a good first step. Another way that you can tell if you're in a good group, if there is a leader or a host, or sometimes groups have hierarchies. These people are the teachers and other people are the students. Are the leaders in that group performing perfection, or do they show you their cracks? The cracks in their armor, right? That transparency can give everybody else permission to be human. One thing that we did at Wisdom School yesterday, the topic of Wisdom School yesterday was hedonism. We had a great conversation about pleasure and about how, pleasure can kind of lead to, dopamine slavery and turmoil, all kinds of other problems. So how do we treat pleasure? And in that conversation, we decided to begin the conversation by doing highs and lows, right? What are your highs this week and what are your lows this week? Because on social media, all of us just have access to the highs. And then we wonder why we're depressed. We're scrolling through these, these sites which just show us everyone happy. We only see one side. We don't see the pain. Nobody posts that. It's boring. The truth is boring. For those of you who are Bo Burnham fans, he says, apathy is a tragedy and boredom is a crime. Anything and everything all of the time. Right? Those are the rules of the algorithm, right? And so it's good to be in a group where you're free to express pain, and when the leadership in that group expresses their flaws, right? And that's something that is in clear opposition to Big Brother. Big Brother is, wants to be thought of as perfect. So much that he'll change the rules and change the past so that, completely infallible. You want to avoid being in the presence of too many people that never show you their flaws, that never talk to you about, I made a stupid mistake and I'm now suffering the consequences of this mistake. And man, I'm trying to get better. You know what I mean? So take a second and think, am I in groups where my worth in that group is determined by how perfect I am or by me playing this perfect role? That's a group you don't want to be in. Phantom, I would love if you came to a wisdom school session, my friend. We're going to have to organize that. That girl says, it would be really cool if you could stream it here. I would love to stream Wisdom School here. You know something? I think, let me know if you guys agree. Another sign of a group that you want to be in is one where when you're corrected, because correction should always be like a thing. And I think, my wife always says, Mrs. Biscuit, she always says, connect before you correct. Right? You don't want some stranger kind of like, here's what you should do with your life, right? You want to connect before you correct. And so the people who you correct, you should definitely have established a relationship, know the pattern, don't, piss somebody off. But when it comes time to correct somebody else or to be corrected, I love for it to come from a standpoint of a kind of like a you're better than that and I believe in you more than just the shame, right? I like to be seen in light of my potential, right? And I think that's the difference between shame and correction, let's say. Shame is there's a problem with you. Correction is there's a problem with this behavior. This behavior is unbecoming of you, type of thing. But no, I just wanted to maybe talk about good groups and bad groups, if we want to really start developing practices to make sure that we're not in echo chambers or in places where we're not allowed to think, not allowed to disagree. Liv says this is a good group. I really appreciate that. How can we make it better? I mean, I'm so happy with how good these lives are going as opposed to YouTube. Like sometimes the universe tells you things. I don't know. Maybe that makes me sound weird, but it's like, I think if things are like continually messing up, it's like a sign that something needs to shift, Liv says more cheese. Add Wisdom School. Even though I'm Phantom says, funny though, even if I'm approached with a correction, I provide all the personal shame by the bucket load. You don't have to pile on any on me. I'll do it myself. I respect that. Yeah. Fam, I definitely appreciate you guys being here. Are there any questions that you have for me before we get out of here? Or does anybody want to join the stage and ask questions about the chapter?